Okay, now we are going to turn our attention to the concept of alienation. This continues Marx's moral argument focusing on the problems with capitalism, the things that he sees as wrong about capitalism. But again, this also contributes to his final argument, or his ultimate argument about how capitalism will destroy itself. So this is the only slide I have in this particular lecture. So it's actually going to be relatively quick. It's going to be much shorter than the others. But I do want to give you a heads up that this really is a pretty key concept, so you want to be aware. So alienation is the idea. And when we think of alienation, what we typically mean with that word is some kind of separation. So a person, for instance, can be alienated from his or her family, which means that they're going to be separated from their family. They're not going to be speaking with the family. There may be some kind of argument or fight that keeps them apart, and so on. But for Marx, though, he's not talking about alienation in general. He's talking about a particular kind of alienation. He's thinking about alienation from our own labor, from our capacity to work. Kind of a weird thing to think about, but if you remember back to our conversation in class about species being, you'll recall that Marx makes the case that what fundamentally makes us human is our capacity to work, and not just work, but work creatively. It's not just doing things, but it's being creative. We compared humans to beavers, where beavers, for instance, will build dams, but they don't intentionally design dams. They don't look at a river and try and figure out the best way to build a dam and then go about building it. They don't sit there and draw plans, and they don't innovate. They don't come up with new ways of building dams. They just do what instinct tells them to do, and it's automatic, and they're not being creative in the sense that human beings are able to be creative. So to be separated then from your labor, your capacity to labor creatively, is for Marx a huge, huge problem. So how does that work? Well, first, the proletariat lacks control over the disposal of his or her product. The product is appropriated by others. It's taken by others. So what the hell does that mean? Well, compare being a factory worker, for instance, to being a medieval blacksmith. So you're a medieval blacksmith, and you have a shop, and you make a horseshoe. And you spend all day working on this horseshoe, or a bunch of horseshoes, and at the end, you pour the metal, and you make the mold, and all this, and at the end of the day, your labor ultimately produces a horseshoe. And that horseshoe, which is symbolically anyway, your labor made real. It's like taking someone's capacity to work and turning it into something physical. That horseshoe is yours, and you can do whatever you want with it. And it becomes this point of pride for you. It's something that you made. It came out of you. So you can sell it if you want. You can take that horseshoe. You can put it on your horse. You can hammer it above your doorway to bring good luck, which people used to do. You can throw it in a drawer if you want. If you don't like it, you didn't think it turned out very well. You can destroy it if you think it's really great. You can tell people about it and show it off. But whatever you do, it's yours. It's your product. You made it. Well, in capitalism, that doesn't happen. If you are one of thousands or tens of thousands of people on an assembly line doing one small part of a job, let's say making cars, at the end of the day, you have no control over what happens to those cars. Those cars aren't yours. Your labor, along with the labor of others, created those cars, but you are completely disconnected from the thing that you made. You don't have any say over what happens with those cars. You don't have any say over how those cars are produced. You can't say, okay, I want to make sure that those cars are sold at a low price so that all kinds of people can afford them, or I don't want to be paid in money. I want to be paid in a car, or I want this car because I made it. You have no control over that. Other people, the owners, take the cars that you and the other workers, the other proletariat, have produced, and they do what they want with them. All you get in return is money. The second point, work is unsatisfying to the prole. Now again, we talked about this in class, where in capitalism, we really take it for granted that we are supposed to hate our jobs, or at least not necessarily that we're supposed to hate our jobs, but we don't see it as unusual. If someone hates their job, we're not shocked by it. If someone loves their job and they genuinely seem to love it, we kind of are surprised by it. Most people don't really love their work. People might like their work, but most people don't show up to a job, and it's not like if they weren't paid, they would continue to go there. You might not mind your job, but you probably wouldn't be doing it unless you were getting paid. Now, there are some people who really do genuinely love their work, but that's unusual. For Marx, that's a huge problem. Our work is, again, what makes us human. It's what's supposed to be giving us meaning in our lives, but instead we see it as this chore that we have to get through, this miserable thing. And that's a problem because it doesn't allow us to express our creativity, but there's also just the practical fact that we spend so much of our life there. We spend about 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. During Marx's time, it was actually significantly more than that. You might work 12, 16, 20, 24, literally, straight hours and have this really miserable work. So when you're working on an assembly line and you're, for instance, let's say you're attaching one screw on the bumper of the car on the assembly as it rolls on the assembly line, and you're just doing that for 8, 10, 12, 16 hours straight. That's a monotonous, routine, empty position, and you essentially become a part of the machine. So there's no capacity for creativity there, and it's also just mentally deadening, and it's really a pretty horrible way to live. So work here becomes a means to an end. It becomes a way to get money to provide for your own needs, but it's not an end in itself, which for Marx, it really should be. He's not just this kind of like utopian where he thinks, okay, people should just work for the love of it. He's very aware that we do need to do things like eat food and keep ourselves clothed and so on. But work itself should be something that we do not just because it meets our needs, but because it is who we are. And finally, labor is under the control of the market rather than the person. So if the market is having problems, and we'll see when we get to the contradictions of capitalism what this looks like, but if the market has problems, say the market crashes or something, you can lose your job and you lose the capacity to even sell your labor to somebody else and even have this unsatisfying work. Whereas if you're a medieval blacksmith, you control what you do. If the market's having problems, yeah, you might have trouble selling your goods, but you are still a blacksmith. You can still make things, you can still do things. Or you can decide for yourself, I don't want to make things anymore because you have the capacity to create. But when you are I almost said a slave to the system, but it's really important that you don't think of proletariat as slaves, because the proles are not slaves. They're very different from slaves, but we're very much under control of this faceless market. And so that makes it even worse for the proletariat. So there are some pretty serious consequences from this alienation. So one I've touched on in this conversation already is that we are separated from our human nature. This thing that is supposed to provide us with meaning in life, our capacity to work creatively and the actual act of being creative workers, is stripped away from us, and we're not receiving that sense of meaning from our work, from our labor. We have this feeling of emptiness, of meaninglessness, of soullessness, of whatever it is. But it's this, from a Marxian perspective, it comes from the fact that we are not able to express what makes us fundamentally human. And there's also this other horrible aspect of this from Marx's perspective, that we forget that that's even important. We forget that work is supposed to provide us with this meaning. We don't see work as providing us with meaning. We see it as something that we just do. It's a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. So we have this sense of meaninglessness. We also become separated from other people, and that leads us with this sense of isolation. So what Marx is getting at here is that, well, when you work and you are part of an economic system, be it primitive communism or slave societies or feudalism or capitalism or whatever, you are fundamentally in a system of relationships with other human beings. So imagine you're a primitive communist. It's really easy to see your relationships to other people within the context of primitive communism. Now, Marx isn't saying primitive communism is better than capitalism. He would not say that at all. But at least in primitive communism, you are connected to other human beings. It's easy, for instance, to see when you're hunting and you're part of a hunting group. It's easy to see your role in the group. It's easy to see the contributions you make. It's easy to see your relationships to others. And you need to go scare the animals while somebody else spears them, or the other way around. You can see how everyone connects to everyone else, and it gives you a place within the group. Same thing in feudalism. You know your place. You know your connections to others. In capitalism, though, we still have these relationships to other people, but they become obscured. They become hidden from us because we no longer relate to people in terms of the labor. So if we are all primitive communists and we're all out hunting, we are relating to one another in terms of the labor. We can see what we're contributing towards. And at the end of the day, if we have a kill, we take down a buffalo or something, we share in that victory. We share that product, not product, that's probably the wrong word, but we share that thing that we produced, right? We produced that meat by killing an animal and taking it. And that joins us together, and it gives us a sense of solidarity, a sense of connection with those around us. Now, in capitalism, we still have those connections, but we can't see them because instead of being connected through our labor, instead of being connected through our product, all that we get is money. And so instead of seeing relationships between human beings, all we see is economic connections. We see ties that can give us money or not. So that blinds us to our connections to other people. And that's going to become really, really important when we get to the next topic, which is false consciousness. Then finally we get to this question of how do we cope? Well, from a Marxian perspective, the way that we're going to cope is actually in a way that helps the system itself, but doesn't help us. If you remember, we talked early on about how everything in an economic system serves the system. So the system itself perpetuates itself. Well, some of the consequences for people of this sense of meaninglessness is that they work even harder. So we are told, and we are raised with the idea that the way we build character, the way we become better people, the way we provide for our families, the way we are good, upstanding members of our community is to work really hard. We place a high value on work. And so when we feel this sense of meaninglessness, this sense of emptiness, well, we want to fill that. We want to build that. We want to have some kind of connection. But that connection, the connection that really is important to us, the connections to other people and also the connections to our labor, that's completely cut off from us. We can't achieve it. But we're blind to it. We end up believing this myth that we are fed, according to Marx, that the way we can achieve meaning is by working harder. So we do. So we work even harder. And that increases our sense of meaninglessness. It increases our sense of isolation from others. And then we work even harder to try and fill that void. That's great for capitalism because capitalism really depends on people sacrificing themselves as individuals, sacrificing their family connections, sacrificing their relationships with others in order to become more productive. So that helps the system, but it hurts us as people. We also can cope, and we do cope, through consumerism, by consuming things. So we work really, really hard. We don't see our families, friends a lot. We don't have close relationships with coworkers, so we have these very isolated lives. We don't have these connections to our product that we're creating. So what we do to help fill this void is we buy stuff. So we buy nice cars, we buy nice clothes, we buy new Blu-ray and DVD players, we buy big houses that provide us with a lot of status. And through our purchases, we also help drive the system forward because capitalism not only needs people who are working really hard, but it also depends on people spending lots of money, and not just spending lots of money, but spending lots of money on things they don't really need. Right? We don't really need a lot of the stuff that we get, but we get it anyway because it gives us a brief moment of meaningfulness. So you'll have an iPhone for a year, new one comes out, and you'll buy a new one. Because in your head, you're thinking you just want a new iPhone, and you'll get a brief brief rush of emotion or a feeling from that new product, but eventually it becomes just like the old one in the sense that you're used to it. It's no longer new or novel to you, so then you're ready for the new one. So that sense of meaninglessness, that void is never filled. But that's good for capitalism because it drives us forward to work more and to buy more. Okay? So we are alienated, we're separated, but that ultimately serves the system because it makes us, or it leads us to act in ways that help capitalism, but that do not help us. Okay.